Welcome to today's explainer on topic 45, the English lexicon, word formation, structure, and loanwords. If you're an advanced linguistics student prepping for that high-level C1 or C2 proficiency, or if you're an educator training for the Escuela Oficial de Idiomas exams, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're establishing a really rigorous academic framework. We aren't just going to sit here and memorize vocabulary lists. We are going to deconstruct the very architecture of the English language. Here is our roadmap for the session. 1. Core concepts in word formation. 2. Major processes, English affixation. 3. The complexity of compounding. 4. Conversion and miscellaneous modes. 5. Prepositions and cognitive linguistics. And 6. Loanwords and pedagogical implications. We're going to methodically work through this taxonomy, starting all the way down at the micro-linguistic structures and moving outward to the global expansion of the lexicon, and of course, how to actually teach this stuff. Starting with Section 1, Core Concepts in Word Formation, the intersection of lexicology and grammar. Let's dive right into this and set up our foundational baseline, which is the incredibly dynamic interplay between semantics, morphology, and syntax. So, to really analyze the lexicon, we first have to distinguish it from grammar. If we draw on the seminal work of linguists like Quirk and his colleagues, we see that grammar is all about making abstract structural statements. It gives us the overarching rules for phrases and clauses. Lexicology, on the flip side, is busy cataloging this indefinitely large, massive number of specific lexical units. But here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Word formation is the bridge between the two. It allows us as speakers to transcend individual, arbitrarily contrived items, like the word cat, and actually use widespread regularities to build complex words. It gives the lexicon this incredible, almost endless flexibility. Now, to truly understand those complex words, we lean heavily on the theories of Bauer and Lieber. They make a critical distinction between a stem, a base, and an affix. Let's look at the word depolarization. If we strip away all the affixes, the prefix, the suffixes, we're left with the stem, pol. And that's great, it tells us the historical root. But the stem isn't always enough to explain how a word is actively being built today. For that, we need the concept of the base, meaning the form of a word that is actually used for productive word formation. So to create depolarize, the productive base is actually polarize, not just pol. Understanding this distinction is absolutely vital for any kind of advanced morphological analysis. Moving right along to Section 2, Major Processes, English Affixation. We're talking prefixation and suffixation here. Let's shift our focus to the absolute workhorse of the English language.
What's really interesting here is how prefixation actually operates. As detailed in Plagg's work on word formation constraints, prefixes generally modify the semantic meaning of a base without changing its grammatical word class. We can break them down into semantic categories. You've got negative prefixes like the a or an in a moral, which you'll often see in learned lexicons. You have reversive prefixes like the and unmask, and pejorative prefixes like pseudo and pseudo-intellectual, which packs a real punch, right? We also have prefixes that determine degree, attitude, or time, plus all those neoclassical prefixes borrowed from Greek or Latin like poly and proto. They're just incredibly productive.
But look at how suffixation behaves in totally different ways. While prefixation shifts the semantics, the primary job of a suffix is to completely change the grammatical class of the word itself. For instance, we see denominal suffixes. Those are the ones that turn something into a noun, like the hood in boyhood. Then we have diveral suffixes, which derive nouns from verbs, like the adjective in singer or the abstract ation in exploration. Suffixation is what allows us to fluidly convert our vocabulary to fit into literally whatever syntactic slot we need in a sentence. All right, Section 3, the complexity of compounding. Let's look at the phonological and structural rules at play when lexical units consisting of more than one base decide to function grammatically and semantically as a single, unified word. And this right here brilliantly illustrates a critical phonological rule. It's something that trips up so many advanced learners. And if you're an EOI student, you absolutely must master this. The spoken stress radically alters the classification and meaning of compounds.
Take first element stress. We see this in academic subjects like history book or established compounds like greenhouse, meaning, a glass building for growing plants. But second element stress? That's used when the first element is a material, a location, or a time. Think apple tart, Museum Avenue, or April showers. If you pronounce greenhouse with second element stress, suddenly you just mean a normal house that someone painted green. Literally, phonology dictates semantics here. It's a real game changer.
Now, structurally speaking, noun compounds are categorized by the underlying relationship between their parts. You have subject and verb relationships, like sunrise, because the sun rises. Verb and object, like taxpayer. You've got verbless compounds where one noun operates another, like a windmill. But I want you to pay special attention to that last row. Bahavrhi compounds. This is a crucial concept. These are exocentric compounds, which means the whole word refers to a separate external entity that isn't actually named in the compound itself. So a highbrow doesn't mean a physically tall forehead, it refers to an intellectual person. The meaning sits completely outside the structural parts. Which brings us to section 4, conversion and miscellaneous modes. Let's explore zero derivation and these somewhat more informal dynamic edges of English morphology.
The English language is remarkably productive, and a big reason for that is a process called conversion, or zero derivation. This allows a word to just seamlessly shift to a completely new class without adding any affixes at all. A noun just becomes a verb. Think of saying to bottle or to mail. We also have back formation. That's where we mistakenly assume a noun came from a verb, and we end up creating a brand new verb retroactively, like turning house hunter into house hunt. Shifting to the more playful modes, we find reduplicatives like teeny-weeny, clippings like demo, and blends where two words are quite literally fused together, turning smoke and fog into smog, or electricity and execute into electrocute.
Let's pivot now to section 5, prepositions and cognitive linguistics. We're going to shift our focus away from open class vocabulary and look at the complex lexical behavior of closed functional classes, specifically how prepositions work in scholarly communication. As the linguist Sethlin Stromberg has extensively documented, prepositions are not just simple grammar words. In academic and formal registers, we rely incredibly heavily on complex prepositions. I'm talking about multi-word units like due to or in accordance with. These are indispensable for establishing precise spatial, temporal, and causal relationships. Think of them as the structural steel beams that connect complex conceptual findings in academic discourse. So the crucial point here, and this is beautifully summarized by cognitive linguists Tyler and Evans, is that prepositions represent cognitive conceptualizations of dimensional properties. They derive from real embodied meaning. We use at for a point in space, on for a surface, and in for a volume. When we teach these words, we aren't just handing out arbitrary grammar rules. We are literally teaching spatial cognition translated directly into language. Finally, we arrive at section 6, loanwords and pedagogical implications. For our final topic, we're going to connect the structural history of English to its global reality, taking a look at the vast borrowings that shape modern English vocabulary. As scholars like Durkin and David Crystal point out, the expansion of the British Empire, combined with modern global communication, turned English into a massive linguistic sponge. Borrowing is practically the cornerstone of the English lexicon at this point. We've adopted words from American Indian languages like totem. We've seen a huge influx from Spanish and Portuguese, often via the Americas, which gave us everyday words like tomato, coyote, and barbecue. We see Asian and Indian influences with bungalow and cashmere, African origins for words like chimpanzee and banana, and even Australian global exports like boomerang. English is just this incredible tapestry of global interaction. So how does this build into our pedagogical implications? Well, as an EOI teacher, knowing this history and structure is completely inseparable from teaching true communicative competence. If prepositions naturally map to physical experience and words form through highly predictable affixation, then rote memorization is entirely the wrong approach. Instead, we have to guide students toward conceptual mastery. We need to be teaching collocations and lexical chunks. That is what provides advanced learners with the essential lexical furniture they need to truly master C1 and C2 levels, allowing them to produce natural, complex language automatically. Which brings us right to the frontier. You see, our lexicon is actively evolving right now. Digital communication is constantly birthing neologisms and totally altering how we use prepositions. Just think about saying you're on Twitter or in a Zoom call. Understanding the mechanics of the past prepares us for the language of the future. So I'll leave you with this provocative thoughts. As new mediums continue to reshape our cognition and how we communicate, what radical new structures will the English lexicon adopt next? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the architecture of English. Keep exploring.